At 9:14 in the morning, 50 contacts appeared on the radar simultaneously. Not missiles, not aircraft, boats. Small, fast attack craft fanning across a 270-degree arc from bearing 019 to bearing 289, closing from nearly every direction at once at 60 knots, already inside 8 miles before the radar picked them up, because they had been running dark since they launched 14 minutes earlier from 11 separate positions along the coastline that had been electronically silent for 11 days. All 50 crossing the 8-mile detection threshold within 22 seconds of each other. Not random. The precise timing of an attack built around a single insight. A threat arriving from 270 degrees simultaneously has no single direction to face and no single solution that addresses all of it before it arrives. 8 minutes. The carrier had defeated missiles at 19 miles. It had defeated ballistic warheads at 4,200 feet. It had defeated torpedoes fired from directly beneath its keel. Everything it had ever faced came from a direction, at a distance, with a geometry that gave the formation time and space to build a solution. 50 boats at 60 knots from 270 degrees gave it 8 minutes and no geometry at all. The fire control system was built to engage threats from a bearing. This threat had no bearing. It had all of them. Iran had spent 11 days calculating that 8 minutes was not enough. Chief Petty Officer James Okafor had been below the waterline since 800 in the morning. Something in the passive acoustic picture on bearing 031 at 7:44 had produced a specific unease in a man who had spent 14 years thinking about what could destroy the hull of a warship this size. He had spent 90 minutes walking the forward hull sections, frame 14 through frame 31, the underwater bow section closest to bearing 031 on the current heading, running his hands along welds, checking fittings, examining plating that had absorbed months of sustained combat operations and was still holding. He was at frame 19 when the combat alarm sounded at 9:14. He did not move toward a ladder. He opened the flooding console on the frame 19 bulkhead and he started calculating, because the number lived in his head the way a phone number lives in the head of someone who has dialed it 1,000 times. The number that separated damage from catastrophe. The number Iran's engineers had calculated from one direction and Okafor had calculated from the other, both of them arriving at it independently. 11. 11 simultaneous contact detonations in the same hull section within a 4-second window against frame 14 through frame 31 at the ship's current draft. That was what produced a breach the damage control teams could not isolate. That was what produced flooding faster than the pumps could manage. That was the line between a ship that survived the night and one that did not. Iran had 50 boats. Okafor had a flooding console and 7 minutes and 38 seconds. He began flooding at 9:14 and 22 seconds. Not because the outcome was certain, because if he was right about where this was going, he needed every one of those 7 minutes and 38 seconds. And if he was wrong, the ship would spend the next 22 minutes carrying 847 tons of water it did not need, and no one would ever know he had done it. He was not wrong. The combat air patrol was already turning at 9:14. 4 aircraft, 2 assigned to the northern arc, 2 to the southern arc, pushing to maximum speed toward the densest contact clusters before their turns were complete. The radar picture showing 50 contacts spread across 270 degrees. Not a wall of threats from one direction that could be addressed in sequence, but a ring of them closing from every angle at once. The formation at the center of a circle that was contracting at 60 knots. The first missile left the lead northern aircraft at 9:15 and found the contact at 7.1 miles. The boat that had pulled 400 meters ahead of the northern pack in the 14 minutes since launch. The crew that had driven the throttle past the red line to be first to reach the hull. The contact disappeared from the radar at 9:15 and 11 seconds. The Southern aircraft's first missile found its target 3 seconds later. 2 boats gone. 48 still closing through open water at 60 knots on pre-programmed headings that no defensive action had yet touched. The aircraft working through the outer contacts, each pass destroying 1 or 2 boats, each pass requiring 40 seconds of turn radius before the next engagement could begin. The boats not slowing, the boats not deviating, each one locked on its heading toward the hull. The crews holding course while missiles found the contacts around them, and the radar picture cleared one by one, and the distance closed with every second. 46 boats, then 44. The formation killing contacts, and the ring contracting, and the arithmetic moving in exactly the direction Iran had calculated it would move when it designed an attack around 8 minutes and 50 boats and 270 degrees. 41 boats at 4.4 miles. 4 minutes and 24 seconds remaining. The 2 escort destroyers opened fire at 9:17. The rapid-fire naval guns on both ships sweeping through their assigned sectors simultaneously, each destroyer covering the approach arc closest to its position. The gun crews working at sustained rates of fire against targets that were close and visible and moving in straight lines at predictable speeds. Boats disappearing from the radar picture in clusters now. 2, 3 in quick succession as the guns swept through tight groups converging from the same bearing. 38 boats, 35, 33 at 3 miles with 3 minutes remaining. 33 boats and 3 minutes, and the formation was killing them faster than it had killed anything in this engagement. The aircraft working the outer contacts, the destroyers sweeping their sectors, every weapon system contributing simultaneously. And the count was still not dropping fast enough. Not because the formation was failing, because 50 boats at 60 knots from 270 degrees is a problem that was designed to be unsolvable in 8 minutes, regardless of how well the formation performed. Iran had done the arithmetic. The arithmetic said 33 boats would still be alive at 3 miles. The arithmetic said the formation was executing without error, and it was not going to be enough. The helicopters joined at 9:18. 2 aircraft that had been on standard patrol since 700 that morning, now driving toward the nearest contact clusters at maximum speed. Each pass through a tight group of boats destroyed 2 or 3 at once. The count that had been dropping by 1s and 2s from the aircraft and destroyer engagements now falling faster as the helicopters worked the clusters closest to the hull. 29 boats, 26, 24 as the close-in gun activated at 9:19 and the leading contacts crossed the 1.5-mile threshold. The gun acquiring the nearest boat at 1.4 miles and firing in 1.1 seconds. The burst finding the contact and the boat disintegrating. The gun cycling at 0.8 seconds and acquiring the next contact at 1.3 miles and firing. Another contact gone. The gun cycling again. 22 boats. Then 21 as the aircraft made their last passes on the outermost remaining contacts, with the last of their ordnance before fuel margins forced them to break off. The aircraft departing the engagement zone with empty weapon stations and a radar picture still showing 20 contacts inside 1 mile, and the count above the number Okafor had been thinking about since 9:14. 20 at 0.9 miles. The gun working through the contacts as fast as the barrel could traverse. Acquiring and firing and cycling and acquiring again. Each engagement buying 0.8 seconds and 1 contact gone from the radar picture. 18 at 0.8 miles. The destroyers firing at boats that had now crossed into the ship's immediate defense zone. Contacts between the escorts and the carrier hull. The destroyers engaging at ranges that placed their gunfire uncomfortably close to the ship they were protecting. The helicopters expending the last of their ammunition on the tightest clusters. 17 at 0.7 miles. 48 seconds. 17 boats and 48 seconds, and every asset the formation had was already firing at something. The aircraft gone, the helicopters expended, the destroyers at the edge of safe firing geometry relative to the carrier hull. The gun working through the nearest contacts as fast as it had ever worked anything. 16 boats, 14 at 0.5 miles, with 30 seconds remaining, and the gun acquiring and firing and cycling without pause. Each 0.8-second cycle producing one contact gone, and the count moving in the right direction and not fast enough. 30 seconds, 14 boats. The gun needed 11.2 seconds to kill 14 contacts at its maximum cycle rate if every burst found its target cleanly. It did not have 11.2 uninterrupted seconds. It did not have 14 clean acquisitions in sequence against contacts that were now close enough that the bow wave each boat was generating at 60 knots was distorting the radar return. 13 boats at 0.4 miles, 24 seconds. The gun killing one more at 0.3 miles. 12 boats, 18 seconds. One more at 0.25 miles. 11 boats at 0.2 miles, 12 seconds. The threshold. The gun still firing. It found one more contact at 0.15 miles and destroyed it. But 10 boats were inside 0.15 miles with 9 seconds remaining, and the gun needed 8 seconds to kill 10 contacts under perfect conditions. And these were not perfect conditions, and 9 seconds was not 8 seconds for 10 contacts under imperfect conditions at 60 knots. The Admiral picked up the all-hands circuit. All hands, brace for impact. Below the waterline, Okafor sealed the flooding console at 9:19 and 54 seconds. 7 minutes and 32 seconds after he had opened it. The 3 forward trim compartments had taken on 847 tons of water. Not battle damage, not a system failure. 847 tons of deliberate flooding executed by a man who had been doing arithmetic since the combat alarm sounded and had arrived at a specific answer and acted on it without being asked. The ship's bow had dropped 1.8 degrees. The forward hull section, frame 14 through frame 31, the section Iran's engineers had spent 11 days identifying as the optimal contact geometry for a simultaneous 270-degree approach at 60 knots, had moved 2.1 meters below the waterline. Below the draft line, the contact charges had been engineered to strike. The 10 remaining boats hit the hull at 9:20 and 3 seconds. Not in the section Iran had calculated. 4 boats struck in the section Iran had intended. The contact charges detonating against hull plating that was now 2.1 meters below its designed position. The blast energy dispersing across a wider surface area rather than concentrating at the stress intersection Iran's engineers had identified. 4 detonations producing hull breaches ranging from 0.3 to 0.6 meters across 4 separate frames. Water beginning to enter at 4 locations simultaneously. Real breaches, real flooding. But not the catastrophic simultaneous stress failure that 11 coordinated detonations in the design section at the design draft would have produced. 6 boats struck the hull in sections that had moved fully below the designed impact geometry. Contact charges detonating against underwater plating at angles that produced pressure damage and structural flex and the violent transmission of blast energy through the steel. But no breach, no water entering through those 6 contact points. Just the violence of 10 charges against the hull at once, and everything that violence produced. The ship shuddered along its entire 333 meters from 10 simultaneous hull contacts. Not the shudder of a near miss detonating in open water. Not the shudder of a warhead striking above the deck. The shudder of 10 contact charges against the hull at the same instant. The energy moving directly through the steel into every frame and compartment and fitting and person aboard in the same moment. Lights failed in 14 compartments from the shock. Equipment failed in 9. 2 fire suppression systems activated automatically from the structural vibration alone. Speed dropped from 28 knots to 19 as the propulsion systems absorbed the shock and automated safety systems reduced power output. 19 crew members down across the ship, thrown from their feet, driven against bulkheads, knocked into equipment by a shudder unlike anything this crew had felt in months of sustained operations. 3 seriously. 1 unconscious from a head impact against a frame in an engineering compartment. 1 with a broken arm from a fall in the Combat Information Center. 1 pinned briefly under equipment that shifted in an electronic space before the crew around him freed him in 44 seconds. 4 hull breaches, water entering at 4 locations before the shudder had fully subsided. The pressure differential at depth pushing water through the openings at a rate Okafor had calculated in advance. He had pre-staged damage control teams at the 4 most likely breach points before he opened the flooding console. While the boat count was still above 30, while the aircraft was still working the outer envelope, while the situation still appeared like it might resolve without anything reaching the hull, he had positioned them anyway, because 14 years of thinking about this hull had produced a man who prepared for what he calculated was coming, rather than what he hoped would not arrive. The frame 14 breach isolated at 9:24 and 17 seconds. The team that had been standing at frame 14 since 9:16, reaching the breach point and beginning isolation before the flooding had reached 40 centimeters in depth. The frame 19 breach isolated at 9:26 and 44 seconds. The frame 22 breach isolated at 9:29 and 2 seconds. This one slower, the breach larger than the other 3. The team working the isolation patch against a flow rate that had reached 180 liters per second before the patch seated. The frame 26 breach isolated at 9:42 and 8 seconds. 28 minutes and 5 seconds from the moment of hull contact to the moment the last breach was sealed and the flooding across all 4 compartments was under control. The ship listed 1.1 degrees to port during the combined flooding from the 4 breaches and the 847 tons of deliberate ballast. The worst list carried since a Russian submarine pressure wave engagement months earlier. The pumps working the forward trim compartments from 9:24 onward as each breach was isolated and Okafor sequenced the ballast release section by section. The bow rising back toward level trim over 14 minutes as the pumps cleared the deliberate flooding. The list reducing, the speed recovering from 19 knots back toward 28 as the propulsion safety holds cleared. Lights returning in compartment after compartment as the damage control teams worked through the shock failures. Fully operational at 9:43. The dock complex, the maintenance structures, the command center that had coordinated 50 boats from 11 positions across 340 kilometers of coastline had been under continuous surveillance from the moment the first contact appeared at 9:14. Position fixed to within 12 meters during the engagement. 16 cruise missiles launched at 9:20 and 3 seconds. The exact moment of hull contact. The facility ceased to exist at 10:07. Iran sent 50 boats. The formation killed 40 before they reached the hull. 10 hit. Iran calculated 11 simultaneous contacts in the design section. At the design draft would produce a breach the ship could not survive. They were right about the number. They were right about the section. They were right about the geometry. The hull was not where it had been at 9:14. And the man who moved it was still below the waterline at 9:43, running his hands along the isolation patch on frame 26, making sure it would hold.